The Last Jedi is an incredibly controversial film. It has the Star Wars fandom completely divided. I have done my best to listen to both sides of this divide, and in this video I want to sort of dissect the hate and try to decipher what is a reasonable criticism and what is just ridiculous trolling. Let's talk about it. What is up, YouTube? It's Josh. This is the Den of Nerds. If you love Star Wars the way I do, subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be doing all sorts of Star Wars videos throughout the year and beyond. Oh, and shout out to Charm Girl 458 who got the nerd card question correct in my last Raylo video. You definitely know your stuff when it comes to Star Wars, so shout out to you, Charm Girl. There will be another nerd card question at the end of this video. Alright, so this video is kind of a challenging one for me to approach. I have to be real. I have to really be real with this sort of stuff, which is so dangerous these days. You see, there's a lot of noise going on in the world right now, and it's sort of hard to decipher through all the social media chatter and get to what is actually happening with people or with the properties that they are talking about. This is like really sort of a weird situation to be in, but I just decided I was going to be totally real and just kind of put my feelings out there and try to be as objective as possible when talking about The Last Jedi. I mean, there's a lot of people that have a lot of issues with this film, and I can't just box up all the problems that people have with the film and just say, oh, it's butthurt fanboys, it's a bunch of crap, they don't know what they're talking about. I do not think that is the case. I think some of the arguments that people have are completely legitimate. However, a lot of those arguments that are legitimate get buried under a pile of ridiculous arguments, and I want to sort of try to explain why I think that's happening. So let's go through some of these points, and I want to try to bring up both sides and tell people what I think about them. The first one is the social justice warrior Star Wars argument. There's a big group of people out there that believe that this movie has been injected with a lot of leftist politics and a lot of social justice warrior or identity politics type stuff. Now, my first reaction to people saying that is like, no, that's not true. However, if you really think about it objectively, there is a certain degree of that is happening. I would argue that it is more of an effort to be inclusive and to be representative than it is to be outright political. I personally really do not believe that that is what is happening in The Last Jedi, and I want to give a couple examples of something that people that are upset about this bring up. They say that all of the white men in The Last Jedi are space Nazis, and that's just simply not true. There's actually a lot of white dudes in the Resistance, including that bearded guy that I forget his name, but he's been around like for like all of the trilogies, but he stands up on the salt blocks and literally looks out at the coming First Order. There's also the two dudes that taste the salt. I mean, one of them is literally Gareth Edwards. You guys are crazy. You're just not seeing the full picture. Are there a lot of female characters that have powerful positions? Absolutely, but that is not done at the expense of all of the white male characters. I think that some people are being just a little too sensitive to this, and it's kind of hilarious, you know, without being too much of a dick. I just don't think you're seeing it plainly. By the way, all the dudes in the Empire from the original trilogies are all old white English dudes. Do you think that that was wrong back then? No, it was just those were the actors that were cast in those positions. So I don't think that that's accurate. Another thing that these people bring up is the fact that Poe Dameron is made to be a sexist in the movie. And the thing that a lot of people are pointing to is the fact that he says that Holdo was not what he expected. And I think that this is just crazy. First of all, she wears a dress and has purple hair. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he was speaking more to her wardrobe and to her hair color than he was to the fact that she's female. By the way, this dude literally worships Princess Leia. He does her every bidding, besides, you know, being a little bit rambunctious and not listening all the time. He more or less has an undying respect and love for Leia and recognizes her as an incredibly strong leader. So if you think they made that character sexist, I think you're crazy. I think you're bringing some of your baggage into the film, and that's not meant to be a dickish thing to say. That's just my honest opinion about it. I also think that Poe is being groomed to be in charge of the entire resistance, and if the rebellion is truly reborn, he will be a major player in the rebellion. I think that you guys are just being crazy when you bring those sort of things up. Another big thing that people bring up is that The Last Jedi throws out all of the past Star Wars lore. And to me, once again, I think this is sort of a crazy statement. First of all, Rian Johnson literally moved to San Francisco while he was writing this, and he met with the story group 2 or 3 times a week. And if you are really a hardcore Star Wars fan, because I've heard this a lot, I've heard people say, oh, it's only the hardcores that have a problem with this. And I'm going to challenge you on that, because if you're truly a hardcore person, like if you've listened to Pablo Hidalgo speak, if you really listen to Kiri Hart talk about Star Wars, if you've been to Star Wars Celebration or other type conventions and hung around these people, you know for damn sure that nobody knows more about Star Wars and the lore than the story group at Lucasfilm. And if Ryan was literally going over notes with them several times a week, do you really think that all of those people would just allow him to throw out Star Wars lore? I mean, crazy to even contemplate. But besides that, I want to talk about some of the specific things in the film that happen that sort of disprove this argument. First of all, Luke Skywalker says something that the Star Wars fandom has been talking about for years. After the prequels, we all realized that the Jedi were pretty flawed, that Yoda's Jedi had some serious problems and could even be pointed to as the party responsible for the rise of Darth Sidious and the Empire. Luke literally talks about that and name drops Darth Sidious. This means that he knows what happens in the prequels, that he is literally a student of what has actually happened to the Jedi in the galaxy. Now, if he had said something that was sort of out of line from the story, or said something that just didn't make sense with what we know as fans, then you could make the argument that he threw out the continuity. But everything mentioned is in a line with the continuity. And as far as the Force goes itself, I mean, people are crazy here. The Force is magic. It's meant to be a fantasy space opera, and the fact that the Force can do all sorts of crazy things is a part of the magic of Star Wars. So if you have a neat little book that is telling you what the Force can and cannot do, first of all, I challenge you once again, because if you're hardcore, you've seen what the Bendu can do, you've seen the Mortis episodes of Clone Wars, you know the father, the daughter, and the brother. If you're an EU fan, you know about Abelosh, you know about the Rakata Empire, you know how much the Force has been expanded and how much of what it can do is constantly in flux. So some of the things that happen in this movie, considering or with regards to the Force, are not throwing out canon, they are expanding canon, and I really truly believe that. Another thing that people say about this film throwing out all of the Star Wars of the past is the treatment of the Luke Skywalker character. Now, I've done an entire video on Luke Skywalker's arc in The Last Jedi, and I suggest you go check that out, because I'm not going to go over everything in this little part of the video I'm doing now. But here's the bottom line. A lot of what happened in the EU is now considered legends, and they just did a book called The Legends of Luke Skywalker, in which some kids are on their way to Kanto Bite, and they're talking about stories that Luke Skywalker was involved in. And Luke Skywalker is this mythic person in the galaxy, and he did, by the way, go do a bunch of heroic stuff before going to create his own Jedi Order. It's not as though the Luke after Empire, immediately became grumpy get off my lawn Luke. In fact, if I'm understanding the timeline correctly, which that is an actual problem with this movie, which I'll get to later on, then it's only been about 6 years since Luke has been in exile on Ahch-To. All the way up until that moment, he was doing heroic Luke Skywalker type stuff, including building a new order. I mean, we see this in the Shattered Empire comic. He's Luke Skywalker as we know him, rescuing Force relics. We see him in Battlefront 2, being the Luke Skywalker that we know, rescuing Force relics. So I do not think that they throw out the version of Luke that we have come to know, and they do give him a heroic end. But you have to understand that this movie all depended on an explanation for why Luke was actually gone. If you couldn't buy the actual explanation for him being gone, then he's not a good dude. Then he's a total evil dude. Instead of making him evil, they made him broken, and they gave you a pretty good explanation for why. And like I said, that only happened about 6 years before The Force Awakens. He's only been in exile for 5 to 6 years. Another big complaint of The Last Jedi haters is that it sort of dismantles everything that The Force Awakens set up. Now, here is the first point that I am actually going to generally agree with. I do believe that there is a lot of dissonance between this film and The Force Awakens, but there's some of it that is still crybaby bullcrap, and I want to go over that first. So one thing that I hear a lot of people talking about is like, why would Luke Skywalker leave a map to find himself? And I think that's just crazy. There's nothing in the canon that suggests that Luke left a map behind in order for people to find him. If anything, he probably used the map to get there, and he may have hidden pieces of it just so that no one would be able to find him. I think it's pretty clear that he did not want to be found, and he went to that island simply to die. So I think people saying that that was set up in The Force Awakens are crazy. If it's in there, I missed it, and I've seen that movie like 20 times, so I do not believe that it is in there. Another thing that people have a problem with is the time between the movies, and I will say that the movie does not do a great job of explaining it, but there are diegetic hints to show you how much time has passed, including Finn recovering from his injuries, Holdo being with the fleet, and all sorts of other things like that. The movie does not take place directly after The Force Awakens, except on Ahch-To. Now, there is some sort of time jumping around here, and I will admit that the film does not do a great job of laying that out there in an easy to understand way. But if you're just gonna say that it doesn't make sense, the time jump continuation, then I think you're wrong. There's actually hints in the movie at it, but I'm sort of 50-50 on it. Another thing that people freak out about is the Knights of Ren being completely dropped from the movie. And I think that this is sort of a weird complaint because the whole narrative is super contained. It's the slow, super fast space race where they're just trying to get Leia and the last of the Resistance. So most of the movie is taking place in that small time period, and the Knights of Ren are probably out on missions doing the bidding of Kylo Ren and doing the bidding of the First Order. In the crawl, it says that Snoke's ruthless legions are doing a military siege of the galaxy. So I think that all around the galaxy, similar things were happening where the military of the First Order is coming in and taking over. So that's where I think the Knights of Ren are. But here's the thing. The not bullcrap problems, the not bullcrap dissonance in the film is definitely there. One of the worst ones to me is General Hux. The dude was Hitler in the first movie, and they make him into Daffy Duck. I think that's completely inexcusable. If I was Donald Gleason, I'd be super pissed. I think that is sort of disrespectful, and the first thing that really pops off to me as a problem in the movie. I will also say that the treatment of the lightsaber itself was sort of ridiculous, not just because Luke throws it over his shoulder and not just because it breaks at the end of the film, but because there's no real emphasis put on it, there's not another Force-backed vision, there's nothing that continues the sort of Excalibur-like reverence that The Force Awakens sets up for that lightsaber, and that kind of sucks, to be honest with you. That is a problem with the movie. I think Ryan should have paid a little bit more respect to that plot point set up by JJ. I think Luke coming back is also something that's not talked about enough in the film. If Leia is really holding off for Luke to come back, that needs to be said more and more in the movie. More people need to talk about Luke Skywalker, why it's so important that he comes back, and why he is their last hope. I mean, people should be conversing about that. Everyone should be talking about it. And the fact that they're not sort of leaves that hang in the air, and it really does not do a good job of showing that continuity from the first film. Arguably, these first two movies are completely about Luke Skywalker coming back to start up the Jedi once again and to bring balance. And yet, it is not something that any of the heroes in the Resistance talk about at all. To me, that's absolutely crazy. It should have been mentioned way more. Another thing that is dropped from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi is the Maz Kanata Finn connection. I mean, that scene, you know, being sort of ridiculous on its own, is made even worse by the fact that Poe is the one majorly talking to her. Finn is standing behind Rose. If anything, Finn should be the one that has the connection to Maz after their moments in her castle in The Force Awakens. This feels super disjointed to me, and I think if they would have focused more on Finn and her having a connection and talking about the conversation they had in the previous film, it would have went a long way. So the bottom line here is that I actually do agree with some of the people that say that Ryan went a little too far in disrespecting the continuity set up in The Force Awakens. It's disjointed, and there's really no reason for it. I love Ryan, but it feels sort of egotistical for him to throw that much of the film away. Now, when it comes to Kanto Bite, there's really nothing good I can say about it. It's a glaring hole in the story for me. And the thing is, I don't really hate the drifting through space device for the plot, and I don't really hate them escaping to go to Kanto Bite. But when you juxtapose those two things against each other, it creates a lot of conflict in my mind. It just feels so out of place. How can they leave and go on this big adventure when the whole crux of the drama is the fact that they can't all jump away? If they're not monitoring for smaller ships, start friggin' jumping, you know, like getting all the people out and jumping through hyperspace that way. I mean, it's just such a weird thing to do in the story, and I think early on some editor or somebody should have brought this up to Ryan, and they should have changed it. I mean, there's literally almost nothing I like about Kanto Bite. I mean, it would have been fine as like an episode of Rebels or something like that, but it being in the film is a pretty big problem. So I understand people that have a problem with it, and there's no defense that I have of it. Now, one of the big points that people bring up with regards to The Last Jedi is the talk about disrespecting the hardcore fans. And this is something that I actually do have a big problem with, because the story group, while trying to keep the canon pretty tight and trying to have it all make sense, is also giving almost complete free reign to their writers. I mean, they probably had some points they wanted Ryan to hit, but from what I'm hearing, they more or less let him write whatever he wanted, and that's kind of dangerous. Similarly, other writers have come out and said they weren't given much direction at all, and they were allowed to write stories within the canon any which way they wanted. There has to be a balance here. You have to know what is going on in this Star Wars world, and you have to be able to guide your writers while also giving them the freedom to write and make a very interesting story. I think Lost Stars is such a great example of this, because it sort of pays this nostalgic respect to all these big Star Wars moments, but with new characters and different perspectives. I think it's super solid, but the problem is it's seeming like the Lucasfilm story group does not actually know everything that happened between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. And that's a big problem, because if you're going to be purposely vague about things and hide the fact that you don't know, it's going to cause a lot of confusion for the hardcore fans. You see, you want to reward the people that are going out and buying the comics and reading the books because they're spending way more money on things than the casual fans. So it just doesn't make sense from a business perspective to treat your hardcore fans in such a way that their efforts in going deeper into the canon are not rewarded at all. And let me give you some examples. The most glaring to me is Captain Phasma. In her comic book and in her novel, she's made to be this ruthless, incredible, badass, and yet the treatment she gets in both films is laughable. Not to mention the fact that if her armor can take a blaster bolt in The Last Jedi, then why did she just lower the shields when she's being held up by blasters from Han Solo and Finn in the first movie? It doesn't make sense. She should have been more badass. There's also no talk about Leia or Luke being the children of Darth Vader, and that's a major point brought up in the Bloodline novel. It ruins Leia's political career and puts a lot of her legacy in jeopardy, and yet no one talks about it. Nobody talks about how the Skywalkers are from Vader. That seems kind of whack. That seems like something that would come up a lot in conversation, especially after she pulls herself back into the ship. There's no talk about Poe's mom knowing Luke. There's no talk about the Kyber crystal, even though that's emphasized a lot. And there's no talk about the unknown regions, even though that is something pushed in all of the other books. Like I'm saying, if this doesn't pay off, if it doesn't feel like it's in the same universe, then people are going to stop buying them, and that's a major problem for Disney. Now, there's even more that I could go into, but I'm already getting really long on this video. I'll probably have to edit it way down. But in summary, here is what's going on. People are being a bit too crazy with their criticisms of The Last Jedi. But I do think there is some good in that. Even though I'm not one of those people, and I would tell them to more or less calm down and enjoy the space fairy tale that they're being told, Star Wars is not just a movie. It's modern myth, and it is a moral lesson for young people. And I do think it needs treated with more respect. You see, it's actually good, in my opinion, that the film is getting this kind of backlash because Disney does need put in check. They do need to be on their toes and understand that they need to do certain things to appease the fan base. Having said that, I don't really personally fall in alignment with a lot of the complaints. I really enjoy the film. I think it's great. I think there's some whack stuff that's in all Star Wars movies, and you just gotta let that go and go in and enjoy it. But I will say that in some weird way, I'm actually happy that this backlash is happening. I want to finish this video by talking about something that Dave Filoni told me person to person, man to man. And yes, if you haven't been following the channel for a long time, you might not know this. I went to the same college as Dave Filoni, and he came back to speak to us all, and I got a chance to talk to him one-on-one. I asked him if he was a big student of philosophy, if he was reading a lot of the same books that I had, or if he even read a lot of the Joseph Campbell stuff or the Sam Keane stuff that informed George Lucas when he was writing Star Wars. And Dave told me that he had not dove as deep in the philosophy that as George Lucas has. But he said that George told him that one of the beautiful things about storytelling is that a lot of these themes will work their way into the story without the storyteller even really having knowledge of them. That's part of the magic of myth telling. You see, there are a lot of people on the planet that have similar stories, and some of these stories were developed when these people had zero communication between each other. And part of the power of myth that Joseph Campbell talks about is that there are certain innate truths to our spirits that will continuously be retold in our stories. So you don't necessarily have to have that knowledge or study it for that knowledge to be passed through you as a conduit. You see, that's what the storyteller is. He is a conduit for the truths that are told through the lies of fiction. I absolutely love this point, and I wanted to end this video on that note because I think it's very important that we understand that the truth is going to come through in these stories, and we do not need to dissect and put everything under a microscope. George is not telling these stories anymore, but in some ways, George was never telling these stories. These are our human, our tribe, our stories, and they're going to continue to be told. So I just want to put that out there for everyone, because whether you hate it or whether you love it, you can't just sit there with a microscope and dissect it. I don't think that that's how Star Wars is meant to be watched. All right, let's check that nerd card really quickly. I want to know, what was the original name for the Rey character? This is all over a lot of the art books and the visual guides. She had a different name than Rey at first. So what was the name of her original name? Answer that question in the comment section below. As I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and nerdy day. See ya!